Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow. And on today's episode, once again, it's all things Champions League as Inter see off Bayern and Barca squeak through against Dortmund. Could the Nerazzurri make it all the way to the final? While on the other side, Arsenal coast against Real Madrid to set up a mouth-watering encounter against PSG. But why are the Gunners an interesting matchup for the Parisians? That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow. So we're back for another midweek edition of the Transfer Flow, and it's good to see you again, Hayden Fanborough. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Patrick?
I'm good. And I'm honestly, I've been buzzing since these games. I mean, partially as well, I am an Arsenal fan. So it was nice to watch that. But I think these games were way better than we had any right to expect, given the way the first round had gone. The Dortmund game was exciting. The Villa game was exciting. And there was even drama in the Arsenal game, which was kind of nice because it felt like it could be very boring. But we've talked a lot about Arsenal. We've actually talked a lot about PSG. So I thought it'd be nice to start on the other side of the draw with Inter Bayern. Now, Inter obviously went into this game with a 2-1 advantage and came out 4-3 aggregate winners. Now, if you look at the expected goals, there's a little bit of luck here. Or, maybe I guess just like Bayern pressure. I think it was something like 3.8 to 2.2 in Bayern's favour over the two legs. Inter are, along with Arsenal, one of the elite defensive sides left in this competition. But while Arsenal are happy to defend with or without the ball, Inter are just amazing at defending without the ball. And in this game, they really just seem to kind of outmuscle Bayern when it mattered.
Yeah, it's a really, for me, I love these round of Champions League games
Mm,
as well. And I think this one was really interesting. Inter as a team under Inzaghi, I think they've got a lot of experienced players who have played in Champions League for years and years. And I think they're a team that are very comfortable in their own skin. They're fine
mm.
when they don't have the ball. When they win the ball, they're still able to do something with it. They're not
Yes.
just panicking. They're not just trying to shuttle down the channels or something like that. They have the technical ability and the tactical acumen to temporarily move players around while they start to expand their shape. And so I think that's a really interesting trait. And that was sort of something I really admire in that team, something I watched a lot for. And at the end of the day, this is the Ted Knutson podcast, and a lot of these ties, set pieces were massive. The set pieces were so important in a way that I maybe, and I don't know if this is recency bias or something, but I really feel like the set pieces were such a big impact on this slate of Champions League games, and none more so than the Inter Bayern game.
Yeah, I think, after this round of fixtures, we'll come on to this, but pretty much everybody has question marks after these games, which is nice that there's not, one team that looks impregnable, but especially on set pieces. Inter scored two in this game, but also gave one up to a pretty incredible Eric Dyer header. But yeah, I think that is the special thing about Inter, the way that they maintain that breakout threat even when they are in their deep block game. In this match, they gave up 20 shots, but they put up 15 of their own. And I've got to say as well, with my against modern football hat on, I loved Benjamin Pavard going absolutely insane after scoring against his old club. Is Bastoni just the key player for this team? Like, he had pretty much a goal-saving challenge in the first half on Olise, and it did kind of feel like he was the passing hub and the star defender across both legs here, as well as being an attacking threat. How do you think that they would do without him? Because he has been linked away a lot this season.
Yeah, and he came off injured or cramp or something. It didn't look too serious. I mean, he walked himself off. He was trying to signal, I think, that he wanted to stay on. But yeah, he's a super important player for this team. And I kind of think there's two things. I think part of what he does in terms of helping them change and vary what they do out of the back, be able to pick passes forward. It allows other players in the team to be match winners. It allows
Hmm.
Nico Barella to really sometimes pop up out wide in high positions, sometimes come lower. It allows Lautaro Martinez to not need to drop too deep or need to get too involved and can stay higher, link with Marcus Thuram and create danger. So he's a player that sometimes center backs don't get the credit that they deserve for the ability that they have to open things up and allow teammates to sort of trust them and take responsibility elsewhere. So he is definitely a very important player for them.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the team that that is really old as well. You know, you've got 37-year-old Acerbi, Sommer is 36. You've got a couple of 36-year-olds, 31-year-olds in here as well. Does this feel like Inter have kind of got this one shot now? Obviously, we saw them in the Champions League final previously against Manchester City 2 seasons ago, but it does kind of feel like this is this group's last attempt at this before embarking on a fairly significant rebuild, you'd imagine.
I'd imagine so. It's a real question of how many years can you do the Mkhitaryan Calhanoglu midfield? I think that's a big question. And that being said, it's already sort of been longer than I kind of expected at this high of a level, the output, and that is the thing when you have these experienced, really intelligent players. I mean, Çalhanoğlu is a guy that used to be a bit of a maverick attacking midfielder, expert ball striker, a bit of creative dribbling, and he's really modified his game to be a responsible professional on both sides of the ball, defends really well, tactically really intelligent, and I think that's sort of a little bit of the identity of this Inter Milan team. But it might be a little bit of the last dance for them. I think there's probably an injection of a couple positions. I think they've already you sort of see, I think what you'll see a little bit is what they've done with the striker group, where they've got a little bit of result by committee, where I think Marcus Thuram and Lautaro
Hmm.
Martinez are the clear starters, but they've sort of rotated that group a lot throughout the year, sort of in pairs. And I would imagine that they're going to need to start doing some of that with the midfield as well and in other positions. So yeah, I think for this group, they are saying like this is us, this is our year, we have to do it. The treble is still on the table.
Hmm.
They did an interview on CBS with Thierry Henry and Marcus Thuram a bit, and you can tell that while he's not trying to say we won't, we're going to win everything and we're all three competitions, you can tell that they're very focused, and it is a real clear goal for them that they want to do something special this year.
Hmm. And on the Bayern side of things, I mean, I thought that the Olise came out of these games with his reputation really enhanced. I mean, he was the creative hub in both matches. He in this game he had some. I think he had 25 progressive receptions, so he was the one outlet, and actually then Lima as well. But it did draw attention to the lack of threat on the left hand side. Leroy Sané was not particularly effective. Nabry was, I thought, significantly better when he came on. Do Bayern look at these fixtures and say this was just the absence of Musiala, or do you think there's a deeper problem to be diagnosed for them here?
That's a really big question. I think one of the transfer rumors we've seen floating around is what's going to happen with Florian Wirtz.
Hmm.
If that's a player that does end up moving, I think there will continue to be questions, especially with Real Madrid out of the Champions League, on whether Xabi Alonso leaves as well. And you sort of wonder that, like Musiala, part of the effect of having Musiala and Olise is having this two-sided approach where the team can't overcommit to one side to really defend Olise because Musiala is on the other side and vice versa. So I think there is a real element that missing him, he's such a key player for them and a real talent, but I'm not sure exactly what the retool would look like. Like I think there's yeah, part of it is you say, look, we missed this key player and we nearly did it. We were so close. I'm not sure though. I think when you're a team as big as Bayern Munich, missing a guy like that and having Thomas Muller in his place, who's continued to look really excellent, it doesn't feel as much like a viable excuse. And again, I think maybe of all the ties in this round of games, this was really the tightest one. Like this one really felt like
Hmm.
it could go either way. And yeah, Bayern will feel a little hard done. And I think vice versa. If Inter had gone out, I think they would have felt a little hard done as well after how well they did to sort of regain control in Germany.
Hmm. Well, shall we look at Inter's prize then for having got through this round, which is obviously a matchup with Barcelona. Barcelona went into this game against Dortmund with a commanding lead, and I thought it was amazing that Dortmund were able to put the result in doubt for a little period. And the underlying performance in this game, they outshot Barca 17-7. It was 3.6 to 0.5 on expected goals. This is the toughest beating Barca have taken this season, hands down. And it's not helped by Wojciech Szczęsny on some real weak link shit. But it was interesting the way that Dortmund approached this game. What what I noticed watching this game is that Dortmund basically went 4-on-4 against the back line and were trying to spring their guys early on. And this worked quite well when they were able to get the ball to Adeyemi. When he would get a good touch, he was suddenly away. An interesting thing as well was with Guirassy. So he was just offside for most of the game. And it was trying, obviously, to drag the defensive line deeper. And it did work as well. Early on, you have that chance that he misses. When the ball goes down the left-hand side, there's a cross in, a defender gets a touch on it, and Guirassy just needs to get a better, or I guess more of a touch on it to finish it off. It required a lot of concentration from the Barcelona defenders because they could kind of ignore Guirassy thinking, oh, he's 5 or 10 meters offside. And then as soon as the ball went wide, the defensive line drops and suddenly he's active again. That's a really interesting approach. Do you think it led to 2 disallowed goals, of course, as well as the 3 they scored? Do you think that this is a replicable idea for Inter Milan? I mean, obviously there are costs as well. It ends up, there's a kind of a man-for-man thing, which ends up in the Fermin free pass down the right, which leads to Barca's goal. But Inter have got to be watching this, right, and thinking, it's maybe not our natural game, but we could do something like this with our wing backs.
Yeah, I think there's an over two legs kind of thing here that I think Inter are going to pick times because I think we all will kind of know Barcelona are going to control a lot of possession here. They're going to attempt to attack. They're going to commit numbers forward. It's going to be really important for Inter to pick the moments that they want to stay compact from front to back and the moments that they really want to try to take advantage of 2v2, two Ram Martinez up against the center backs. And what do those sort of sequences look like? What sort of setup do they need to do beforehand to take advantage of the channels? I think in particular, they might target the left hand side. I think Koundé is maybe the player that can be a bit more responsible and will pick his moments to go forward or to stay connected in that back line. And so I think that that's going to be something to look at as what that play looks like. Are those going to be, I would say more likely than not, it's going to be some sort of play that involves some diagonal running, not just putting the ball to the side and then going long and vertical and allowing the center backs of Barcelona to sort of be behind the play and attack the ball in the air, but force them to chase bouncing balls. They're not sure if they're going to stay in out wide. They're not sure how wide they want to get pulled with the threat that's still there centrally. So that's going to be a really interesting part. Obviously, Dortmund sort of were able to put caution to the wind to a bit. And we know this Inter Milan team aren't going to do that. The game, I think, will not look like the second leg, but that aspect of when are the periods that sort of 2v2 at the back could be really beneficial for Inter and how are they going to take advantage of it? It's definitely something that Inzaghi and his coaching staff are reviewing this week.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're starting to touch on it here, but I think this is quite a positive. Look, no, Barca are not a fun matchup for anybody, but I do think Inter have reasons to be optimistic here because Barca's superpower is their transition game, right? They are the best in the world at it right now, and Inter are just not going to let them do that, or at least they're going to try and prevent it. And to be honest, they're pretty good at doing that. On the other hand, can Barca prevent Inter's transition game? That's a really big question. So you've got strength versus strength and weakness against one of Inter's relative strengths. I would kind of be thinking this is not the worst matchup for us if I were Simone Inzaghi.
Yeah, it's always for me, some of the things I think about are less about like the matchup itself
Mm-hmm.
and what are the coaches thinking about to do in training during the week. Like I wonder if you're Hansi Flick, to what degree are you like, wow, we really need to do set pieces, Inter Milan, like this is could be just what the game is because they're gonna sit low block, or you know what, we see something in their low block we actually think we can take advantage of if we play Pedri instead of Fermin, or this sort of combination here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's work on it. I'm really interested to see. I think, especially from Barca's perspective, what they sort of see. What are the early ideas 30 minutes into that first leg? Because I think both Inzaghi is going to be prepping for you. You have such a clear identity. That high press is so well known, and how high that back line is. So you sort of know the other team will be prepping for you and looking to exploit that. You're trying to think of that counterpunch already. So I'm really interested to see what Hansi Flick is putting together here in a game plan. And I hope the set piece element is part of it because I really think that that has continued to be a highlight. And like we were saying with Inter Milan, they
Mm.
both scored some goals off set pieces, but also were vulnerable to, yeah, obviously the Eric Dyer header. I think it's not meant to be a shot, really. I think it's meant to be headed back across goal, but that's a drawn up set piece targeting Inter Milan, the back of their zone.
Mm.
And that, if that's a weak point in their zone moving forward, or that Barca really highlight, it'd be interesting to see Barcelona spend additional time on the training ground. It's not something I think we think of historically for that team, but it could be a really important factor in this matchup.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that Dyer one, I was kind of surprised to see Inter give that up because, yeah, while you don't necessarily expect it to drop in, I think there are two Bayern guys at the far post waiting to nod it in if it doesn't go in, and it was quite a simple move. It was a corner to the elbow of the box, and then Nabry whips it to the back post. Anyway, I'm really, really excited about this fixture. I just think this is the best attacking team in Europe this season against, if not the best defensive team, then certainly a candidate. And Inter have really given us some standout moments in the Champions League. I really implore people, if you haven't, go and find some of the images taken of Lautaro Martinez celebrating his goal because it goes insanely hard. Shall we move over to the other side of the draw then? Let's start with Villa PSG because similar to the Barca game, we thought, well, PSG should coast here, and they did go up 2-0 early on, and we thought, now Villa have to come out. This is not something that Emery wants to do. It's going to kind of play into PSG's hands, but they ended up winning 3-2 and edged the expected goals battle, edged the shots. Generally speaking, I think this was a really impressive performance from Villa and made me kind of take it made me interested for what Arsenal's coaches would be thinking watching this, because they would probably watch this and think, well, we're a better defensive side than Villa, and we've got some elite players on the break. There's something going on here.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. It was pretty clear in the first game how much PSG trained to come up against the Unai Emery Aston Villa low block that we
Hmm.
expected. That was a big part of their training. They worked on circulating the ball, patterns of committing players forward and trying to balance themselves to really attack it. And I think there might have been an element of they weren't sure exactly how Villa was going to play this game. I think we sort of know that teams can't go full throttle for 90 minutes.
Hmm.
They've got to pick their moments of when they're going to attack, how they're going to do it, and commit bodies forward. And I think PSG, it felt like there was almost a little bit of uncertainty about how Villa were going to do it, which I think the Enrique countered with that. Well, then let's really try to control the ball. Then let's make
Mm.
it look as much like a regular Liga game because we know how to do that, and we've already got a lead. Let's just say if we played any Liga team with a lead, we'd still feel confident in playing, and let's do that. So they were offensively minded. They committed their fullbacks high and inside at times, and they were lethal in transition. And at the same time, Aston Villa, I thought were really impressive. They nearly scored a set piece within the first minute or two of the game to Onana that flashes across the face of goal. That maybe could have changed things. For me, there's a number of interesting players for Aston Villa, and I think we'll talk about Marcus Rashford in a second. But Morgan Rogers, I think, is a player that
Hmm.
could really make a name for himself and be in contention to start, or really be maybe more of a rotation starter for England come the World Cup. Be a guy that starts the second or third group stage game or something like that. I thought the variety of what he provided,
Mm.
including his athleticism, his ball control, his ability to combine, very, very impressive. It's something that PSG had a hard time dealing with.
Yeah, having one of those guys who's just a really powerful runner and can just bust out of the midfield in a game like this is so valuable. But you can kind of see that Villa didn't want to get drawn into a midfield battle in this game after they kind of got pressed out of it in the previous game. Rashford had more touches than Tielemans. I think he had something like 39 to Tielemans 29, which is kind of unheard of, right? But they were able to get him on the ball again and again and again. And he went 4 for 9 on dribbles. He had 2 shots. He had 10 touches in the penalty area. He had 5 carries into the penalty area. He has an incredible assist for that third goal. He was just an outlet for them all game. And you were talking before we got on air about the way that Luis Enrique was using his fullbacks in this game. How was he using them, and how do you think Villa were able to exploit it?
Yeah, so I think it was something that got talked about of, should PSG sit in more, try to control this game? And at times Hakimi was high and inside. You see for Nuno Mendes for the goal, he's on the penalty spot, he's in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
Uh, it reminds me a lot of the Ange Postecoglou Tottenham Hotspur team. And we've sort of talked all year about the trade-offs of that team. When they're firing offensively, it feels like they can cut through anybody, and at the same time the vulnerability at the back is really still there. So you're asking yourself, why are they taking these risks? Well, it's to open up space, it's to draw the back line more narrow so that there's space out wide for Kvaratskhelia, Barcola, whoever the wide players are for PSG in those moments, to get around it. I think there's a really, really good point that you make about Villa not wanting to play the midfield game with not just the midfielders. We've talked about the PSG midfielders before, about this PSG micro midfield of Neves and Vitinha, who can play in tight spaces. They cover a ton of ground. They're really energetic. I think in addition to not wanting to play that game, you also have Hakimi coming in at times, Hakimi pushing forward with a ton of speed. Again, Nuno Mendes varying his position. So that's really difficult to play with. Villa maybe try to avoid that and think about what are ways to use Marcus Rashford. Again, not a number nine who's just going to occupy the center backs, and a player who's comfortable playing out wide and can try to take on players in different areas of the field to be that outlet. And that, as you said, that's definitely a part of what Villa hope to do to get something out of this game.
And it seemed like when he went off, it really did feel like a lot of energy went out of Aston Villa. I mean, in theory, it makes sense to bring on Ollie Watkins, because Ollie Watkins is also, great at running the channels. He's good in combination play. He's a big physical specimen. Like, he's got quite a varied shot palette, but he didn't get a shot or a touch in the penalty area when he came on. It just felt like having him play alongside Rashford would have been a really difficult proposition for those PSG centre backs going into the last 15 minutes of the game. I mean, as it was, to be fair to Villa, they could have been at 5-5 before that, right? With that chance that comes through to Asensio, which is just a simple ball from a centre back straight down the middle, and Pacho misses it. Is that where you see the weakness of this PSG side? The fact that their centre backs will be left on an island. And while, look, I think most people are admirers of Marquinhos, Pacho is not like a world class defender. It does definitely feel like this is a situation where you want their defenders to be deciding the game rather than their attackers.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of an element where I think the Arsenal game is going to be a bit more of a midfield duel and a midfield
Sure.
battle. I
Hmm.
think I think Declan Rice has sort of come into his own with this Champions League, and really stepped up in their last two ties, which we'll speak on shortly. I think he's elevated that. The PSG midfield, as we just said, is something that Aston Villa was afraid of and worried about. It will be really it will be really interesting to see how Odegaard varies his position to try to cause that midfield some problems and buy Rice and Partey, if that's who it ends up being, more time on the ball, or the ability to get a foothold in the match, because you can't really imagine that Arsenal are going to spend large periods of time bypassing the midfield in that way, because they also don't really have a center forward in right now, Mikel Merino, who is going to have the 1v1 dribbling threat or the speed to beat an opponent that Marcus Rashford had. Marcus Rashford, it's a really interesting set of attributes, and you can see why Tuchel is interested in keeping him around the England setup, with Ollie Watkins, again, a player that's looked really good the last 2 years, 3 years, has looked like such an excellent player, but just doesn't have some of that same ball control and dribbling threat that Marcus Rashford did.
Hmm. Okay, well, I think that maybe that is our cue to go over to Real Madrid, Arsenal. You take the names out of it again, and it kind of went as you'd expect. Like, Arsenal had a big lead. They defended really well. And we said at the beginning, look, pretty much everybody comes out of this round of fixtures with at least some concerns. It does feel like Arsenal might have the fewest, at least based on these performances, right? Because this was, look, they give up the ridiculous chance to Vinicius Jr., but half of the expected goals they gave up in this game came from that mistake. They gave up 18 shots, but just 1.4 XG. It did kind of feel like they just weren't really troubled, and they put up a couple of expected goals of their own. What do you think about that? Do you have concerns about Arsenal coming out of this match?
Not on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I think
Sure.
there's a real argument to make that William Saliba is the best defender in the world right now.
Hmm.
He's got a history of defending against Kylian Mbappe, and I thought that was one of the keys to the match for Arsenal. The way Saliba defended Mbappe was really important in this game.
Yeah, you were talking about this off air that you said it's nice to have a guy there who has played against Mbappe a lot, and I said that well, we know that Saliba, when he started playing football when he was 6, his first coach was Kylian Mbappe's dad. So if one guy should know who he's coming up against in Mbappe, it should be Saliba. And it was interesting that Arsenal felt kind of confident leaving Saliba one-on-one against Mbappe quite a bit. They said, their defensive plan for dealing with Mbappe was, yes, deny him service. And in this game, Real Madrid are averaging 47 final third entries per 90 in domestic play this season. In this game, they had 29. So they just couldn't move the ball up the field. But when they did, Mbappe was picking up the ball between the lines quite a lot. And it kind of felt like Arsenal said, all right, well, your guy needs to beat our guy. And if he can, then he gets a chance.
Yeah, Saliba did a really good job with that. And if we're looking forward to the next match, that's where I think that's one of the areas where this could be really different. Ousmane Dembele, the way he varies his position, both in transition when PSG look to break out, and also he'll interchange out wide. There's there's a lot of threat here and a lot of nuance that's going to make this more difficult for Arsenal to defend. That being said, I think defensively is not where I have a big question over this Arsenal team. I think they've been really resilient and really strong all year. I think on the attacking side, obviously against Real Madrid, pushing to get back into the match and start a comeback. There was space at the other end, especially for the Martinelli goal at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't, over the course of the two legs, I don't feel like I walked away and felt largely impressed by this Arsenal attack.
Sure.
That if
Mm-hmm.
PSG does have a lead and Arsenal has to sort of bring the game to them and control the play, I think there's maybe that's the fear for Arsenal, is that they don't have enough of that cutting edge, and that's sort of maybe the reason they've tied games in the Premier League. Again, Arsenal are actually the only team in second place, not in first place in their league coming into this set of
Mm-hmm.
semifinals. That
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's actually been the lack that we've seen throughout the season, that they just don't have the same cutting edge that Liverpool have had with Salah, the same cutting edge that we have seen from this PSG team, the same cutting edge that has enabled Barcelona to have a number of players, maybe even in the Ballon d'Or conversation.
Sure. No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's a situation where Arsenal probably are going to have to be thinking about set pieces or committing bodies and doing those sort of open play set pieces that we've talked about in the past. What's interesting is Thomas Partey got yellow carded in this game, so he's going to miss the first leg against PSG, which could mean either Jorginho, if he's fit, or Marino going into midfield alongside Rice. If that were to happen, then maybe you would see something like Martinelli at centre forward, or even in Nwaneri or Saka or something a bit weird, which might make things a bit less predictable for this PSG team to deal with. I mean, as it was, look, we should point out Real Madrid are just not a good version of Real Madrid right now. And they did just play into Arsenal's hands in this game. They attempted 43 crosses in this match, which I do not expect to see from PSG. And across the season, in Europe's top 5 leagues, there are 96 teams, and Real Madrid rank 88th for crosses attempted, and Arsenal rank 5th. So looking at that, who do you think trains crosses more?
Yeah.
I mean, even if Real Madrid had attackers who you thought might thrive on crosses, it still just feels like put your opponent in a position that makes them uncomfortable rather than doing the thing that they're happy to do all day long. And Arsenal were happy. There was no real point in this game where it felt like Arsenal were doing something they didn't want to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think you're putting in crosses against the coach who played under David Moyes for years and years. So
Sure,
he's
exactly.
he's not worried about training these guys to defend those situations. So no, I think that's a really good point. With this Paris team, there's the really interesting component here for me is that Enrique is really flexible. I think in the build up to these quarterfinal ties, we talked about Inzaghi being practical, his team being flexible to deal with different opponents, but also different situations. That if things start to change, if a player starts to look really strong or they start to look vulnerable, that they'll make the adjustments needed. And I think that's where Enrique is really clever, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that there are options off the bench. So the front three for PSG with Dembele, Kvaratskhelia, Barcola, the ability of those players to take on people 1v1, to change position, it allows them to be a real threat that puts teams in awkward situations. Lewis Skelly is going to have one of the biggest challenges of his early career against PSG.
Sure. And I mean, look, from Arsenal's point of view, the fullbacks came through the Real Madrid game about as well as could be hoped. You know, Vinicius Jr. is one of the best attackers in the world, and Timber handled him pretty nicely across both legs. What's interesting about someone like Kvara is that he is maybe not as skillful as Vinicius, but he's much bigger, much stronger. And yeah, it has been interesting to see. We talked about this previously, but it's been interesting how with those wingbacks or fullbacks going high, you've quite often seen the front three attackers drop, and it's almost like they're the line behind the front line and they're allowed to do some kind of quarterbacking stuff. It's going to be very hard for Arsenal to get a fix on who they need to be covering in any given moment because of the way that this team rotates.
Yeah, the ability of Timber to force that play back, but then not having Thomas Partey as that physical presence in front of the back line.
Mm-hmm.
Who comes in and replaces that? Is it I was even when I was kind of flipping through the Arsenal squad, thinking about is there a world in which Lewis Skelly comes into the midfield? I
Sure.
think probably Marino is most likely what ends up happening there. But I was looking at that. Zinchenko came on late in the game. Could Lewis Skelly pivot back to his midfield position and do something there to add a bit of quickness, a bit of athleticism? There's options for Arsenal, but that is going to be a real challenge. This PSG team, you don't want to come too tight to those guys because they can run past you too and then get into
Yeah.
that dangerous space. So that's going to be a little bit of the cat and mouse game if PSG are able to control a lot of possession high up the field. One of the interesting things is who gets the home leg first in these ties. I think
Mm.
that three of the four teams that have gone through had the home leg and basically dictated what the matches would look like come the second leg. That could be a real element here. If PSG are at home first, the Parc
I
des
think
Princes just feels like an absolute cauldron.
I think they're at home second. I think Arsenal are at
Okay.
home first. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that puts even more pressure on Arsenal to really have a good attacking plan and not just on set pieces, but find a way to try to create as much as they can to get themselves in a lead to then utilize their excellent defending.
Yeah, I mean, obviously as well, one of the things here is that Arsenal are just not that healthy, especially relative to PSG. It's hoped that Jorginho and Calafiori are going to be fit for this matchup, and maybe we could see something interesting with Calafiori, kind of like you're talking about. Maybe he allows Lewis Skelly to go into midfield, or maybe he pinches in. Who knows? But one nice thing is that, and we talked about this, I guess, with Pep earlier in the season, is it's really nice to see inventive coaches be put in a position where they have to be inventive. And Marino at centre forward has been kind of a revelation. He's been great. But it's been interesting to see Arteta have to come up with solutions. So I'm intrigued to see what he attempts against this PSG side, because there's not that much help coming. Like, if Arsenal are to win the Champions League, they're going to have to do it with Mikel Merino playing centre forward and Jakub Kivior in the back line. Okay, so looking at the shape of these ties overall, and I think they really are mouthwatering. They're really interesting matchups on both sides. Do you have any picks here? I've got to kind of force you to do it, because I've got to say that the Arsenal PSG side is just like impossible to me. I really don't know, but I kind of want to believe with Inter on the other side. I know Barca are incredible, and Barca could easily win this tournament and could blow the doors off Inter and whoever they meet in the final. But I do like it for Inter. I do think there are reasons to be optimistic, and they are playing, pretty amazing football right now.
Yeah, I know Neil Shalat is really interested in this Inter Milan team and sees a path for them going all the way, maybe even doing something in that eventual final. I think on that side, I feel confident in this Barcelona team. I
Hmm.
also there's a little element of me that having that game against Dortmund internally, the way Hansi Flick and his coaching staff are going to look at that is they're going to be putting the pressure back on the players to say, look, this performance wasn't good enough. We yes lost the game and not the tie, but like this was really not the level that we're going to need to bring, and really use that to try to refocus the group. So I think Barcelona will come out flying in this first game, and there's not many teams I've seen in Europe this year that can hang with them when they do that. On the other side, I kind of agree with you. It feels impossible to call. I can see a real path for Arsenal taking advantage, especially with Saka back. I think we
Hmm.
didn't really touch on that a ton, but the way Saka comes back in this team, the dimension that he adds to that team is really, really important. And it's what elevates Arsenal to one of the top teams in Europe. So I think there's a real way you can see it going that way. There's a real way you can see PSG and the creativity that they have going forward, the tactical savviness that it's that game is really, really in the balance going into it.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And we've got a couple of weeks to wait. Look, everybody listening or watching this, please do let us know your predictions for these games, and let us know if you think there are players that you'd like to see us cover in a bit more detail, because obviously we can't talk about all these players, but at this stage, there are multiple people having incredible games. I think this is one of the best Champions Leagues we've had for a long time. We've had amazing fixtures the whole way through, and I think we've got the best teams in the
Yeah.
final four, being totally honest. Certainly the best matchups, I would say.
Yeah, I think we've got really good tactical matchups. And we talked a little bit before we started here about how coming into this, the teams in the league phase of this, the replacement for the group stage, were second, third, fourth, and 15th. PSG had a pretty difficult schedule in that time, I would say, but we've ended up with some of the strongest teams. We've ended up with teams that are first, and second in their European leagues. We've got the best of the best in the competition right now in matchups that feel like they could go either way because of the talent on display, the coaching, and that's what you really want. I think that's the beauty of the Champions League. Myself and probably a lot of people were unsure if there needed to be a change to the format, and I
Sure.
think it's paid off. I think it's been very exciting season. We've seen a lot from these teams, and these big matchups feel worth it. It feels like the teams have certainly earned it. I don't think anyone is here lacking merit or something like that. We are in for some really good matchups here.
Yeah, we got lucky that this is the year that the transfer flow debuted, and we got a really good
Yes,
Champions League, especially given that we didn't have a particularly exciting Premier League title race.
right.
Thank you everybody for listening or watching. Thank you, Hayden. Where can people find you between now and your next appearance on the pod?
Yeah, I'm at H Van Brewer on Blue Sky, mostly talking about analytics and football stuff.
Great. And thank you very much for your support, your continued support. Please make sure that you're signed up for the newsletter, and we will have some interesting team rebuilds coming at you very, very shortly. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.